This is episode number 20 with Nathan Havey.
So let's go, 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 go. I follow, wherever you go, 'cause
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Inventions Show, a podcast about all things invention and reinvention, where entrepreneurs, leaders, and authorities in their field today share their story of triumphs and challenges in both life and business. My name is Tacklee, entrepreneur, investor, inventor, and the host of this show. Now, today I'm totally honored to have a guest with a powerful message for all. Nathan Havey, founder of Thrive Consulting Group, speaker, author, entrepreneur, visionary, and a powerful innovator in the global movement to evolve capitalism. So hold on to your hats. It'll simply be mind-changing, life-changing, and business-changing. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Nathan, and thanks so much for being with us.
It's great to be here, Tech. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. My absolute pleasure. Now, the first thing I'd like to ask all my guests, Nathan, for those who are not familiar with yourself, is can you please give us a window into your background and what was your first job?
Sure. Yeah, my first job was at the age of 14 working in a local pet store. And so I very quickly discovered that I don't like working in a pet store, so it didn't last very long. But since then, I was very into politics in high school and college, and I went to Washington D.C. and worked in Congress as a staffer, and then kind of soured on the endless partisan fighting and bickering and. With all respect to people that want to make change in that way, I didn't have the patience for it. So I sort of went out looking for some other way to be able to continue to use my working life and my career to help to advance, a world that works for everyone. And eventually found a different way forward, which is what I do today.
That's simply fascinating. Now, I'm just curious, Nathan, and also for our listeners out there to better understand your relationship to say, corporate sustainability. What triggered your initial interest initially, and why is it so important to you?
Sure. I mean, I think I've been somebody that took global warming and climate change pretty seriously from a pretty young age. And so for me, it seems like it's one of, if not the greatest challenge. And to quote, I believe it's Congressman Jay Inslee, who said that we are the first generation to feel the effects of climate change, and we're the last generation with the ability to do anything about it. And so, if we don't get our act together on this, the consequences could be pretty dire. So that's why I care about it.
Yeah, no, it's totally powerful stuff. Which leads me to, firstly, I want to talk about your featured documentary, Beyond Zero, which is just, which I believe it's had its world premiere screening at the Boston Film Festival in September.
That's right.
It offers a roadmap for how businesses can reverse climate change through the story of billion-dollar organization in Interface, which was founded by the late Ray Anderson. Can you please share with our listeners and viewers, what Beyond Zero is about and why it's so crucial to get it out there?
Sure. Yeah, it's a fascinating story. In 1994, Ray Anderson, who was the founder of what at the time was the world's largest carpet tile manufacturing company, read this book by Paul Hawken called The Ecology of Commerce. And in it, Hawken talks about how all of the major life-supporting systems on Earth are in decline. All of them. And Ray Anderson was an engineer by training, and he got sort of just the engineer's mentality. So no politics, just the systems view of, oh, wow, this is unsustainable. And so it really opened Ray's eyes to that. And in his book, Hawken is pretty blunt about that it is business and the products of the Industrial Revolution in particular that are driving the vast majority of that degradation. And so Ray, as the captain of industry that he is, says that it was like a spear in the chest moment for him. Where he realized that he was, he realized he was a plunderer of the earth, stealing the future from his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And in that moment, he had this epiphany that there must be a way forward, because if the answer is, well, then just shut down all of industry and let's go back to a pre-industrial revolution kind of a society on Earth, well, that's, I mean, realistically, if we don't get our act together, we may well be there in 100 years. But ideally, that's not the way we go. Ideally, we're able to sort of innovate and figure out how to get our industrial economy in line with natural practices. And in 1994, Ray Anderson walked into a conference room on August 31st and gave a speech to his assembled environmental task force and laid this vision on them that Interface would become a company with zero environmental footprint. And they thought he was completely insane. And over the next 25 years, they've pretty well done it. They actually have now, just this year, a few weeks ago, released a carpet tile that sequesters more carbon than would have been emitted if they hadn't made the tile at all.
Wow.
Their greenhouse gas emissions are down 96% from that baseline in 1994. And so that's essentially what the story is. It shows how a company can invent or reinvent itself, drive innovation that without losing much market share. And really, they believe very much so, and the film makes the point that this was actually profitable for them. Can reinvent itself and get in alignment with biomimetic processes that would have you be consistent with what the economy is going to need to look like to be able to survive and be sustainable.
Awesome. Now, profitability, something I want to bring up a little bit later, Nathan. But I totally love the Beyond Zero trailer. It's like a blockbuster. I absolutely love it. And with your permission, and I'll love to share it with others and hope to spread the word.
Please do.
Yeah, and now also, you've researched and spoke to countless organizations through the years. So what motivated you to the Interface story? Why pick Interface?
Interface is unique, Tack, and I get this question a lot. And I've been trying to put my finger on what it is exactly. And I think it's partly because their journey started in 1994. And there aren't very many companies that were into green business or sustainable business or like purpose-driven organizations, conscious business. A lot of that stuff is companies that have been starting that 10, 15 years ago for the really original ones. But Interface, 25 years ago, their journey began. And so there's been enough time for it to play out to sort of get to these endings of the story, right? And so that's one reason. But I think the other reason was Ray Anderson himself. Rather than doing what most companies do, where they really try to get credit for all the great innovative work that they're doing, until the day he died, Ray Anderson would say that he was still a plunderer of the earth. He'd be very happy to share the work that Interface was doing, but it wasn't at all to like aggrandize himself or Interface. He really had this really self-effacing higher purpose. And I think that's what made him so approachable, is that nobody else had to point a finger at Interface and say, yeah, but look, you're still not doing this or that. Ray was the one who said, here's all the stuff we're still getting wrong. We've got this progress to show, but this is the areas we still have to reinvent. And I think that because of that very transparent, very authentic way of being, it dropped everybody's defenses and it made him uniquely effective. And so there's something about that story that has changed people. But in my experience, and this is anecdotal, but it's only about 1 in 3 business people that I talk to that have ever heard of Ray Anderson and Interface Carpet. And even some people that like are teaching courses on business and the environment don't know the Interface case study.
Interesting.
And even those that know it, they've heard of it kind of, but they don't really know the ins and outs and the details of the story. And so I thought that there have been 2 previous documentaries that tried to tell the Interface story in part among other companies, but I think it's worth its own telling. And so that's why I thought, this story must be better known if we're going to get business leaders to sort of align on what kind of effort is needed for us to get a handle on climate change. And so that's why I thought, well, I'll take a shot at it. I've never made a movie before, Tack. It's my first movie. And,
that's awesome.
And we'll see how it works.
No, fascinating. I mean, Interface is in Australia too. I think they're headquartered in Sydney. So yeah, they're massive.
Yep.
So now, visionaries like Richard Branson, Pal Pullman, and dozens of others have already been inspired, by the Interface story and Beyond Zero. For our listeners out there, how can they become involved and spread the message?
I think that one of the key turning points for Interface was when they started to work with Janine Benyus and this concept called biomimicry. And the basic pitch that they talk about here is that life has been evolving on Earth for 3.8 billion years. And there's no company that has an R&D department that is that old that is going to be testing to figure out what works best. And the evolutionary structures that exist in our world today have that much R&D time behind them. And so there is genius in the basic ways that natural systems function. And biomimicry is an organization that studies from an engineering perspective and from a biology perspective, how those functions work. And so when Interface started to look at, okay, how would nature make a carpet? How would nature attach carpet to a floor? How would nature, and that question, how would nature do it, is one of the real amazing opportunities that there is for companies to reinvent the way that they do processes, because chances are nature actually has a better way of doing it. And I don't want you to think this is like, weak and kind of like we're just not gonna there are brilliant ideas that come out of this stuff, and the film has a couple of different examples. But one thing that every company can do is just ask yourself that question, and the Biomimicry Institute has a ton of free resources on this. They also have paid consultants if you're interested, but I would say that that's an excellent place to start. Is ask yourself, how would nature run the business that we're in? And if you start doing that, you may find some game-changing innovations.
That is an interesting question. How does nature do it? I'll have to do more research on that one too. That's just awesome. Now, out of curiosity, Nathan, what do you think Ray Anderson, if he was still around, will say right now with what he's seeing that's happening around the world?
Yeah, I think that he would be heartened that there is, the global Paris Agreement and things like that are trying to get a handle on this, but in truth, one of the characters that's in the film is a gentleman named Jim Hartzfeld that was close with Ray throughout a lot of the journey, and spoke with him a few times shortly before his death. And Jim confided that Ray was really disheartened. We are not seeing the Interface example. Ray's vision was that this would be the exemplar that would lead to a second industrial revolution. And by the time he died, there was very little evidence that was happening. And I think still today, there's very little evidence that it's happening. There's sure a lot of marketing on this.
Yes.
Tons of marketing.
But
when you look at actual game-changing environmental innovations, there are signs of hope. There are bright spots, but they're few and far between.
Awesome. No, most definitely. Now, I must also quickly bring up your podcast, Nathan. You run a 10-part mini-series podcast, 10 Things You Know About Stakeholder Capitalism, a storytelling project which I absolutely love and follow. I think the 9th episode was just released a couple of days ago. So now there's a lot of great insights into the world of stakeholder capitalism. Can you please explain and share your views, on the 3 non-financial forms of capital, being social capital, human capital, and nature capital? Yep.
And so the basic idea there, and this is from a project that we covered in our first episode called The Economics of Mutuality. And this is something that has been happening inside of the Mars Corporation for about the past 13 years. They have this internal think tank, and they were animated by this question: what is the right level of profit? Which is a weird question to begin with, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because what most business people would say, well, more is obviously the answer to that question. But with Mars, they have this systems view that's very interesting, where they talk about if any part of a value chain is taking kind of more than it is sort of justifiable, then what that does is it weakens the other nodes of the chain, but you wouldn't be able to see it. And so they wanted to make sure for the long-term performance of their business that they were taking the right level of profit so that the rest of the value chain was sustainable so that the business could continue, right? But as they got into researching this, they found that financial capital, money, is a very poor metric to be able to figure out the actual sustainability of value chains. And they figured out that, people's health, right, their ability to continue to perform the functions they need to perform, human capital, is very, very important there. But so are the quality of the relationships between people and their ability to trust each other and transact. And that's social capital. And so that's also very important. And all economic systems are dependent at some point on natural capital, which is the environment's ability to sustain the activities of the business. But we don't have metrics for human capital, social capital, and natural capital that are anywhere close to as robust as financial capital, right? We can measure the heck out of money. We know how to do that really, really well. So the economics of mutuality is this amazing research project that has just been released from the Mars Corporation, and they're now an independent organization that exists to spread these ideas. But they've got rigorous ways that managers can measure human capital, social capital, and natural capital that are game changing. And the basic thing that they found was, if you're managing for all four kinds of capital, instead of trying to maximize your financial capital, often unbeknownst to you, at the expense of the other kinds of capital, then you're going to eventually implode. But if you're managing for all four of them, you can actually get returns that are far better, even only in terms of financial capital, right? You can get better financial capital returns than if you are trying to maximize your financial capital. So this is sort of the underlying notion of this idea of stakeholder capitalism, where versus the Milton Friedman shareholder capitalism, where we're trying to maximize returns for shareholders, turns out if you actually have a stakeholder approach and you're focused on making sure that you've got value creation for all of your stakeholders, your shareholders actually do better than if you're seeking to only maximize return for them. And so does the environment, and so does society, and on and on. So it's just a better operating system for capitalism.
It's definitely interesting there. So in your opinion, Nathan, why do you think so many businesses ignore it? Is it because they don't understand?
It's that they don't understand. It's because it's not normal yet, right? So it sounds a little weird when you talk about this stuff, and there's no GAAP accounting for natural capital, right? Generally accepted accounting practices. We're still pretty much in the nascent stages of understanding the way that these things behave, and the economics of mutuality is this. It will be the shoulders upon which we stand, 30, 40 years from now, as more and more people get this stuff. But right now, we don't, it's a lot, what gets measured gets managed, right? And it's real hard to measure that stuff in really reliable ways at the moment. This is going to change fast, but right now, I think that's why most people still are like, well, if I can't get my hands around it, then what do I do? How do I operationalize that? That's why they ignore it.
Yeah, most definitely. Now, I'm intrigued, Nathan. What would you say are the actual things that move, workplace culture to have people plugged in? How do you build an extraordinary workplace?
Sure. There's a framework that I think is really helpful with this, and it's based on what is, I believe, still today the best-selling article ever written for the Harvard Business Review. And it's by a guy named Frederick Hertzberg, and the title of it was, "One More Time, How Do You Motivate Employees?" And in it, he lays out this thing called two-factor theory. And very briefly, it suggests that when we think about an engaged workplace, we sort of think of it in a continuum from like worst job ever to dream job. And there's all of these different factors that would influence that. And it's real tough to figure out what actually matters here. And so he says it's much more useful if you divide that into two different spectrums. One of them is on something called hygiene factors, which is like brushing your teeth. So if you brush your teeth twice a day, doubling that is going to give you very little marginal return. But if you're not brushing your teeth, you get a cavity, then a little teeth brushing to at least get to a place where you're okay matters a lot. And there are factors in a workplace culture that work like that, where it's like pay, benefits, your relationships with your boss, you having the tools you need to do your work. If there are problems there, if you feel like you're being dramatically underpaid, if you don't have what you need to do your work, if your boss is a jerk, it's like a cavity where that has to get handled first before you can focus on the other stuff that really motivates people. Right. And a lot of businesses get this wrong because they don't focus on those basics first. But if the basics are okay, then more pay, like bosses trying to be even nicer, it's perks and ping pong tables and game tickets.
Better Christmas party. Yep.
It does not matter for motivation. If the hygiene factors are taken care of, then the ball game is on this other set of things called the motivation factors. And the motivation factors can be boiled down to four things. They are care, which is the experience that I am cared about by my boss as a human being, not just as a job function, but they actually know and care about me. And in the United States, 88% of people say no to that question. They are not cared about as a human being, right? Now, I don't know what the international statistics is, but yeah, it's 9 and 10, right?
Yeah.
So care, meaning, right? What I do for work is deeply meaningful to me. Growth, I am becoming the person I want to be. Not just I'm getting a promotion, I'm getting more money, but I am becoming the person I want to be. That kind of growth. And then finally, say. And say is about, I'm able to use my full measure of talent and ideas and brilliance to participate in the charting of the course for this company and this enterprise. Rather than the Henry Ford, right? I'm paying a man for his hands, not his mind.
Yeah.
The opposite of that. It's at every level, people want to be able to participate in the conversation and sort of share their ideas. And so if you can create a culture that is good enough on the hygiene factors and then really embraces those four motivation factors, that's what creates a employer of choice, really phenomenal workplace culture.
Wow. Make sure you take note of that one, listeners. So now just going back to sustainability a little bit, Nathan, and profit, we're speaking about a little bit. In a way, it's unfortunate, but sustainability has a stigma, of being costly or cost more. So for startup companies and companies at early stages, what can they do to help, drive sustainability when profit is basically at the forefront of keeping the company afloat?
And it's a fantastic question, Tack, because I think there's a lot of folks that hold it like that. Ray Anderson famously said, sustainability doesn't cost, it pays. Because what sustainability is at the end of the day is simply about wasting nothing. Right. So it's completely consistent with lean manufacturing. And for a startup, you better be lean unless you have a lot of investor capital, which has its own problems. But the basic understanding of sustainability is that it's not superfluous green initiatives. Right. Which in many companies that are doing sustainability for marketing, it's not at the core of it. It's about how do you do the business that you are doing in the absolute most efficient way possible. And in that, it is totally consistent with having a high-performing company writ large, right? So the nugget, though, for I think a lot of businesses is that you need to design sustainability into the business model itself. Rather than trying to here's the business. Now, how do we make this non-sustainable business sustainable? And so, an example, and this is a little bit out of left field, but there's a friend of mine that's a professor at a college in Denver, Colorado called Metro State. One of his students has this thing about cigarette butts. Because you see him on the sidewalks, you see him all over the place, and he would love to see if there's a way that he could clean up all the cigarette butts, because there's all kinds of environmental impacts from the chemicals that are in them, and I could go on and on. That's a problem he would love to be able to solve, and he's trying to create a startup company specifically to solve that problem. So rather than it being a nonprofit where you go get a foundation grant and you hire folks to go and clean up the cigarette butts, he's actually trying to see if there's a way that you can use it as a feedstock for a different kind of economic model. And turns out cigarette butts are actually a fantastic feedstock for a certain kind of mushroom that also takes care of the toxins, so that you can basically grow mushrooms with these cigarette butts. And so then as a way to have that business work, you have to go clean up the cigarette butts, not as an act of charity, but almost like mining to get you the raw materials you need for your product. And so the point that I think everybody needs to sort of understand about this is that there is such an opportunity for invention when you refuse to accept a trade-off between stakeholders, because essentially that's what that argument is, right? We could be green, but then we're not going to make as much money. That's a trade-off. Or we could make money and not be green. So somebody wins, somebody loses. If you reject that thinking from the get-go and say, how do we actually create a situation where both of those things can happen together? and you begin your business invention from that place, you will find incredible inventions those are the kinds of things that are going to get us to where we need to be by the time our generation is retiring. Right? That's what has to happen, is that kind of non-trade-off based thinking. And in that way, Tack, there is no conflict between sustainability and profit making.
Yeah, no, awesome. Totally awesome. So Nathan, what is your company doing for the environment?
Well, I am a one-man show, and so I don't have a whole lot of industrial processes that I need to worry about. I try to live in as sustainable a way as I can. I'm not crazy about it, so I'm pretty conscious about it. One of apparently for any individual, one of the most important, impactful things you can do is to eat a mostly vegetarian diet. And so I do that. And then the work product of my company is very, very much focused on getting leadership teams and other companies to start to take these ideas to heart and look at opportunities for invention and reinvention within their businesses, to figure out how they can sort of, without sacrificing, evolve their companies to be what they will need to be 30 years from now if they're still going to be a viable enterprise.
Okay, interesting. Now, moving on to your journey as an entrepreneur, Nathan, as all entrepreneurs know it sometimes can be a lonely journey. How do you manage risk and fear?
Great question. I have a number of just personal practices, and this is I work a lot in the conscious capitalism movement. And one of the major focuses that they've got is this idea called conscious leadership, which is kind of at the base of everything. Yeah. And in conscious leadership, they talk about the need to continue to develop three kinds of intelligence: your emotional intelligence, your spiritual intelligence, which is not religious in nature, it's about meaning making, and your systems intelligence, which is making sure that you're paying attention to the systems that are at play instead of any specific problem or suboptimal outcome, right? You can look at the symptom, but much better to understand the system if you want to try and do it. And so I think a lot of times for me, when I'm in a place of fear, it's a real opportunity for reflection and growth on one of those three areas. Because if I'm aligned from a spiritual intelligence standpoint with like my purpose and what I want to have happen in the world, then even a tremendous failure is great progress, right? It's the Edison quote about, being able to tell you, I forget how many it was, like 1,500 ways that you can't make a light bulb, right? It's that basic idea. And so that really helps with a lot of fear and with risk. And I think the other piece of risk mitigation is the systems. If you really can look at the systems that are at play as you're trying to launch a new product or start a new venture, and make sure that you've got those things working for you as best you are able to know, then I guess they balance each other in a neat way, because you can be like, this is my purpose, I'm just going to believe in it and go. And good luck, you might, but man, if you can be as savvy as possible while you're doing that, then I think that gives you the best shot at success. And so for me, I have plenty of failures, but I think that just sort of the psychological resilience to be able to have failures and keep going and all that kind of stuff is definitely through those things. And the tactical thing for me is I just have I have a journal, just a 10-year journal that has you write just 5 minutes a day. And then you can sort of flip back to see where you were 5 years ago and be like, I'm better than that.
I bet,
So it helps you to kind of keep track of progress. I live in Colorado, and so the metaphor that I like to use is when you're climbing up a mountain and you're just you're tired. Sometimes if you just stop and turn around and see how far you've come, you're like,
that's true. Yes.
Okay, I can keep going here, right? And so it's that kind of a metaphor for me.
Nah, great insights. Thanks for that. Now, can you please share what is your biggest area of growth, Nathan? I'm sure it hasn't been all rainbows and unicorns and lollipops.
No. For me, it's definitely emotional intelligence. And the way that I understand that is sort of the way to understand your emotional reactions and deal with them productively as it's happening. So it's not never getting angry and stuffing it down. It's about sort of getting the message that the emotional reaction is trying to tell you and being able to do that well. And for me, Tack, I still suck at it. So I don't process it quickly. I need take it and go, have 24 hours or something to figure out what even was going on. And that's better than not even doing that work to begin with, which is where I was 3 or 4 years ago. But for me, it's in moments of acute stress and conflict and emotional reaction, I still, I'm not where I want to be.
Thanks for that share. Really appreciate it. Now, just talking about turning points or point, when you look back at your entire life, Nathan, everything that you have, your journey to date, can you pinpoint a point that changed everything for you? Or would you say it's more a collection of moments?
I think that there's maybe 3 pivotal ones that I'll mention. So one of them is in October of 2010, I got fired from a social media consultancy, and it was very justified. I lost 2 of our biggest clients, and so it was totally appropriate. But that was the thing that pushed me out of working for other people and have to sort of figure out how to do it on my own. And I will probably never go back. I like it much better this way. So that was one. Right about at the same time, I think, is the first time that I read Ray Anderson's book, Confessions of a Radical Industrialist. And it was the thing that introduced me to this idea that while business is the problem for environment, and Ray didn't write about this so much, but I agree that it's also the problem for culture. There's just this global lack of dignity. And a lot of that is given by the fact that people spend 40-ish hours a week in a place that isn't set up to actually recognize their dignity as human beings. And so business is at the root of a ton of that. But business is also the only system in a modern society that is sufficiently complex and powerful to be able to correct for it. And that's one of the things that Paul Hawkins says in The Ecology of Commerce as well. And Ray, parroting Paul, said that in Confessions of a Radical Industrialist. And so as I left politics and I was looking for what's the thing, I realized that if you can change the way that business understands its role in society, everything can change. It is the single biggest organizer of human effort in the modern world. And if that effort can be intentionally set for slightly larger scope than what we've got it for right now, we could make tremendous progress in our world. And so that for me was like this light bulb, holy smokes, I think that this is what my career was supposed to be about. And then the third moment was I was driving from Anchorage, Alaska to Denver, Colorado by myself over 5 days. And I listened to this book while I was driving called The Firms of Endearment. And this is the second episode of my podcast, you'll recall. But in it, there's this incredible study of these companies that from 1998 to 2013 beat the S&P 500 by 14-1 by sort of doing stakeholder capitalism light. Right. And so for me, like I had this fire in my belly with the Ray Anderson idea that business can do this, but I think I still was holding on to the notion that business can do this if only we can convince these greedy business people that they need to care about something more than just profit. But what Firms of Endearment showed me is there's no trade-off here. It actually, even if the only thing you care about is profit and maximizing shareholder return, the best way to get there and to stay there is by sort of doing and embracing some of this stakeholder capitalism stuff. And so that for me was like, it felt like the completion of something that was like, I know for sure this is what I want to use my working life for.
Oh, awesome. Now, everyone has their own definition of success. So what does success mean to you, Nathan?
Thank you. I have this actually written down in the journal, and I try to look at it on a very regular basis. But it is, success is making my full contribution while savoring the journey.
Nice.
And so deliberately there's not a specific vision or result. It's about, in whatever circumstances I may find myself in, if I'm able to make my full contribution and enjoy the journey, then I have been successful.
Yes, enjoy the journey. That's what it's all about. Yep. So if you were starting a business right now, Nathan, what would you set out to solve and why?
I don't know if you know this, but it's funny you ask. I am starting a new business right now.
Oh, there you go.
And the problem that I'm setting out to solve is that companies do not know how to change. And so specifically, so in the film, the incredible entrepreneur that's at Interface, her name is Erin Nizam, and she was Ray's right hand. And then as Ray died, Erin sort of helped to carry the torch. And Ray died in 2011, so she's been at it for almost a decade now as one of the leading voices there. And when I asked her about what she thinks is needed, it's not more corporate sustainability training programs. It's not better assessments for how companies need to do that. And we find the same thing in culture and with human capital too. What companies actually need is they need to better understand how to change themselves, how to reinvent, because the hierarchical structures that most companies are using are really bad at taking a look at the not consensus idea and really developing that to find a different, better way forward that is sort of on the margins of what they thought was going on. Because this stuff always comes from a blind spot. Right. And so the business is actually this year-long training program called the Intrapreneur Accelerator that launches on it's 6 days from now on November 15th. And the podcast, 10 Things You Should Know About Stakeholder Capitalism, sort of is going to end with an invitation for the people that believe in this and want to be part of transforming their companies to really go through this boot camp training process to really understand the way that individuals within a company can work well within hierarchical systems to drive change that wasn't going to happen anyway. And so that's the problem, and the new business is trying to provide a solution for exactly that.
So, Entrepreneur Accelerator. I'll definitely put that in the show notes.
Oh, good, thank you.
No, will do. Now, in interesting times like this, Nathan, what is your advice or message for our listeners? We have an audience from around the world. Some places are opening up, some back in lockdown, but in general, people are still at home. So what should people, in your view, be doing right now so they can come out, a better person?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would suggest is answer the question of what is the worthy problem that you would like to use your working life to solve. And I think that with a lot of times when we talk about invention, we're sort of inventing. I'm someday going to meet the person that invented this, but I always use this example of the little spray bottles that have water with a little fan on it for hot days, where you can sure, somebody invented that, and there may have been a really higher purpose reason for it. But for me, it's would that be worth your working life? Because we spend half of our waking adult lives at work, and that's a huge chunk of our time on the planet. And are you working on something now that you would be proud of at the end of your working life? And I guess as people are in a place of reinvention, there's a lot of opportunity right now for people to come back and figure out a better way forward, because we've seen around the whole world these things that we thought were just true. This is how it works. All of that is up for grabs right now. And so there is a tremendous time of opportunity to reset in a way that is better for in many definitions of the word better. And so I guess I would just say that as you are looking at what your next move is it worthy of your working life? And if it is, then be smart and figure out a way forward. And win or lose, you will have used your time very well.
No, I love that one, Nathan. Totally love that one. So what is your legacy, and what do you want to be remembered for?
For me, it's real clear. It's about having been a part of the movement that transforms capitalism into something that looks like this stakeholder capitalism thing, right? I'm not one for specific branding on this. Benefit corporations, conscious capitalism, the business part of the Sustainable Development Goals. I don't care what it's called, but there is this new kind of business that fully embraces and accounts for its impacts on natural, human, social capital as well as financial capital. And that's a way that the world would work far better for everyone. And so I want to know that I was a part of bringing that into being.
Okay, excellent, awesome. Now the next two questions, Nathan, I ask all my guests. So it's very interesting, at the response. First is, if you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
This is going to sound like sort of the same thing again, but I think it might be a question like, on your deathbed, would you be proud of what you're working on right now?
Okay.
And just
Yeah, that's yep.
Just as a question. And if the answer is anything other than hell yes, then I think there's some introspection that needs to happen.
Awesome. And now, what superpower do you wish you had, and why?
It's actually hilarious because my 4-year-old son asked me this exact question this morning.
There you go.
So that's good. So, but yeah, I think it's really about mind reading.
That's a good one. Yes.
And the reason for that is that so much of what is required to effectively drive change is to be able to match your message to what we'll call the antenna that the other person has, right? So if you can understand what matters to them, what's important to them, you can really speak their language, and just it makes it so much easier. And it takes a lot of time to get to know people well enough to know that stuff. And so if I could read their minds coming in, I could get a lot more done.
I haven't had that one, Nathan, so 2 thumbs up. No, it's totally remarkable, Nathan. Now, unfortunately, we have to work towards wrapping up, and super mindful of your time. Phenomenal messages, shares, and words of wisdom. Really appreciate your transparency and authenticity. Just have 2 last questions before we wrap up. First is, where can people find out more about yourself, Beyond Zero, and your new ventures?
Great. Yeah. Beyond Zero, all the details you need on that is at beyondzerofilm.com. And I'll just say that if there's any academics that are listening, there is a way I think that we're going to be able to release the film for inclusion in academic curriculum probably before the public release. And there is a form for that on the website. So if anyone is interested in that, please give me your name and email there, and we'll be in touch. And then for the other stuff, it's all under the banner of something called the Institute for Corporate Transformation. And so they can find the podcast there, as well as the Entrepreneur Accelerator, and that's at institutect.com.
Awesome. And for our listeners, they'll be in the show notes after this podcast. And secondly and lastly, Nathan, what parting words of wisdom would you like to leave for our listeners?
I would suggest, they say that necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Yeah.
And there's a thing that is really informing all of my work that's almost like a design principle, which is strive for synthesis, not compromise.
Ooh.
So when you have seemingly opposing things like profit and environment, right? You could compromise a little bit of profit for a little bit better environment, but that's never the way to real invention, to real breakthrough, game-changing stuff, right? There is a way, and if you just hold it as a truth, there is a way to resolve trade-offs between different stakeholders in a way that synthesizes the trade-off so that it's actually better for both, not some meeting in the middle. That's the thing that I think is going to be the watchword of what needs to happen in our generation. Is we need to find the ways to synthesize the seeming trade-offs that are out there right now. So I think parting word, strive for synthesis, not compromise.
Fantastic. Now again, thanks for your time, Nathan. Incredible insights, learnings, and knowledge. It will be totally awesome to catch up in person one day, when everything sort of goes back to flying.
Yeah, so I'd love that.
Yeah, awesome.
You don't want to come to the US right now, though, so that's all right.
You can come down under.
that would be great.
Thanks again, Nathan, and really appreciate your time.
It sounds great, Tack. Thank you very much for having me.
Welcome. Now, all right, I hope you've enjoyed this interview. You can find me at turn-x.com and also on social media at iam.tacklee. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode. If you're enjoying this podcast, please do make sure you subscribe and take a minute to leave us a review. Thank you.